What I want to talk about is motivational deficiency disorder, which is a new disease, which is an extremely important one, and there's something of an epidemic underway. 1 in 5 people suffer from motivational deficiency disorder, and there's a widespread unmet need for treatment. I'm actually a sufferer myself. Recent data does suggest that motivational deficiency disorder is higher among people interested in the arts. I think there's a few in this audience. These are some of the symptoms of the condition. Some days you really just cannot get off the beach. People used to call me lazy, now we know I was sick. These are some of the other conditions: a sense of being trapped on the couch. Your relationships can suffer, your work life suffers, and certainly the cleanliness in your domestic life. But there is a treatment, and so many of you can go away from here feeling much better. So while 1 in 5 people suffer from MODID, now we switch from fiction to reality. We've been hearing recently for the last 10 years that 1 in 2 women suffer from female sexual dysfunction, and that there's a widespread unmet need for treatment. This is the merging of marketing and medical science. So that's what I'm talking about today. It's based on the book Sex, Lies and Pharmaceuticals, which has just come out, and I've been talking about all over the world in the last month or two. The making of female sexual dysfunction is a case study in the merging of marketing and medical science. So I'm going to talk about that mainly in the next 15 or 20 minutes, and just at the end, some thoughts on how to clean up the dirty business of medicine. This is the book that I'll be talking about. This is the North American version. Just an important note here: sexual problems are real and sometimes debilitating. Drug companies don't invent disorders, and medicines can extend lives and ameliorate suffering. These are incredibly important caveats before you hear what you're about to hear. The story in Sex, Lies and Pharmaceuticals is about how the companies don't just sponsor the science anymore. I think this is what many of us think, that drug companies sponsor the science and then independent researchers go out and do the science. But in fact, things have changed. The companies now actively help to construct the science, and I'll show you how. So these are what I'm calling the basic building blocks of this new condition called female sexual dysfunction. The definitions, the prevalence, how widespread is it, and the diagnosis, how do we measure it, how do we test for it. So let's start with the definitions. There are formal definitions of this condition in the DSM, which is the Psychiatrist Manual of Diseases. They include disorders of desire, arousal, orgasm and pain, but they've been criticised for being narrowly focused on the individual functioning of a person's sexuality. And the classification of this condition is arbitrary, imprecise and changeable. This is written by someone who actually writes the definitions. But what we see over the last 10 years is an attempt to really nail down this condition. As sales of Viagra started to rise and rise, we saw an urgency in the minds of the drug companies and some of the sex research community to really try and define a sister condition to erectile dysfunction. And this is a key conference that happened in Cape Cod. This is a meeting organiser writing an email to someone who wanted to go. The meeting is completely supported by companies, and half of the audience will be drug company representatives. This is where we've got to with medical science. The conferences aren't just there being passively funded by the companies. The company executives, the company marketing people, the company medical people are interacting with the scientists on the floor of these conferences. Another conference in 1998, when they were writing a definition of FSD, 18 of the 19 thought leaders who wrote the definition had financial ties to the companies. They wrote a definition claiming that the condition affects up to 50% of women. Same pattern over and over again. I was at a conference last year in Paris, exactly the same situation. Companies sponsoring the conference, companies actively taking part in the discussions. But don't believe me, I'm a journalist. Perhaps you might believe someone from the industry themselves. This is someone from a company called Vivus Pharmaceuticals, and she talked in the early 2000s about how they were defining female sexual dysfunction. This company was trying to develop a genital cream for women at the time. In the process of defining the disease, we've been able to get thought leaders involved in FSD and really work closely with them to develop this entity so that it makes sense. And this is a drug company clinical research manager speaking, and she said that we're hoping to be able to expedite the process of drug development and of disease development. And these are on-camera comments that feature in a film called Orgasm, Inc., which is coming soon, so to speak, to a television set near you. It's an incredibly good film. I just saw it the other day in Vancouver. It's a lot of fun, Orgasm, Inc. That's the definitions, and the definitions have continued to change as the last 10 years have rolled along. But prevalence, how widespread is female sexual dysfunction? Well, believe it or not, this paper appeared in the Journal of the American Medical Association in 1999. 43% of women have FSD. What can you say about a figure like that other than cross it out? It's based on a survey from the early 90s, and this was the survey. These were the survey questions. In the past year, was there a period of a few months when you lacked interest in sex, had trouble getting aroused, felt anxious, didn't find pleasurable, came to climax too quickly, experienced pain? Now, if you answered yes to just one of those questions, you were put in a box that said you have FSD. And the italics are mine because it's an interesting problem to have. So 43% of women in JAMA. The paper does carry a disclaimer saying that the results were not equivalent to clinical diagnosis, but this disclaimer gets washed away in the marketing. That figure, that paper has been cited over 1,000 times in the medical literature. If there's any academics in the audience, they'll know that that is quite a rare thing to have a paper cited 1,000 times. We all dream of that. The media talks about widespread dysfunction. Press releases talk about a great unmet need. Difficulties are being confused with dysfunctions. Then we end up in 2005 with another big survey claiming that 30% of Southern European women lack interest in sex. This is one of many findings of a large global survey, got a lot of attention, taken very seriously. If you look closely at the paper, you find that Pfizer funded the survey, Pfizer staff worked on the survey team, and Pfizer orchestrated the survey as a marketing effort. And we know that because the lead author of the survey told me that as part of the research for sex, lies, and pharmaceuticals. This is the merging of marketing and medical science. We see in 2008 more surveys appearing, this one claiming that 1 in 10 women have HSDD. Hypoactive-sexual desire disorder. Now, I'm glad to see there's a few smiles when that is mentioned, because that is actually being purported as a serious condition by the industry. And some of you may have heard about this disorder of low desire. There is increasing media interest in it because the industry is desperately trying to build a market for new products for this condition. Again, when we look behind the survey, it's not that hard. You just have to go to the survey article. We find the study was funded by a drug company, Boehringer, a German company. All the authors were financially tied to Boehringer. One of the authors of the survey was a Boehringer staff member. And this is at a time when Boehringer is promoting an antidepressant to treat HSDD. And that finding of 1 in 10 women is based largely on the answer to a single question. So if you take home one message from today, it's be extremely skeptical about any claims you hear in the media about the prevalence of disorders and dysfunctions. We don't know actually how widespread this condition is because so much of the evidence is constructed with help from those obliged to maximise markets. And this is probably one of the most important slides. Non-industry funded studies find very different results. This was a small study, but a very innovative study in Britain recently. What proportion of women would be diagnosed with female sexual dysfunction using a standard medical approach? Then the women were asked themselves, do you think you have a problem? And then the women were asked, are you distressed by that problem? And you can guess what happened here. 38% were diagnosed using the standard tools. Only 18% thought they had a problem, and only 6% were distressed by it. So we're starting to boil down to the cohort of women for whom their problems are so severe and serious that some sort of medical or other intervention may be appropriate. Other studies, very large studies in Britain, have looked at this question, and the authors of this study of 10,000 women questioned whether a lack of sexual interest should really be seen as a dysfunction at all. Another study that interviewed 1,000 women about their sexual issues found that unlike pain on intercourse, which can be a very debilitating problem, lacking interest was not regarded as a serious difficulty by women. 3 companies have been prominent here: Pfizer, Procter & Gamble and Boehringer, as I mentioned. So let's move now to the diagnosis here. How do we measure and test for FSD? Questionnaires are created to diagnose and measure the effects of treatment. And you can guess where the questionnaires are coming from. These are the key questionnaires, some of the key questionnaires. There are many questionnaires being used to measure whether you have FSD, whether the drugs are helping you. And again, if we look closely at where these tools are coming from, they're either funded or actually created by the drug companies. And this, to me, is one of the most extraordinary things, that the industry is creating the tools to measure the success of their own products. I don't understand how the conflicts of interest have got so out of control in medicine, but this is where we've come to in modern medicine. This is one of my favorite diagnostic tools, the Decreased Sexual Desire Screener. This was announced to the world last year via a press release from a drug company. A new, easy-to-use 5-question diagnostic tool. It's like a little checklist. The screener enables clinicians, not necessarily experts in female sexual dysfunction, to diagnose the condition with high accuracy in a few minutes. Isn't that efficient, if nothing else? The busy clinician can diagnose you and give you a label, possibly lifelong, in a few minutes. This is I think, one of the low points in modern medicine, this press release. But it's emblematic of a much, much bigger problem. Don't think this is just some quirky story from some crazy Byron Bay-based journalist about some idiocratic example. It's not. It's emblematic of a much, much, much bigger problem. The fact that these tools can be presented as valid diagnostic instruments and rolled out across the world without any regulatory oversight is extraordinary. So where did that tool, that 5-question tool, come from? Came from this article. Boehringer funded the development of that tool. 2 of the 6 researchers were actually drug company employees. The lead author, she had financial ties to 10 drug companies. I'm not quite sure how she had time to do anything else, but she was speaking, consulting and advising different different combinations of that for different companies. And this is the real kicker here, that the editor-in-chief of this journal is on contract to a drug company. I mean, again, I really don't understand what's happening here. The science of how we test for this, again, industry overwhelmingly helping to develop the tools. And then, of course, on top of all those basic building blocks, you need, the next step is education. You have to educate the professionals and the public about the science. And what do we see? We see that the drug companies start to roll out their industry-funded education. And bear in mind, your GP is attending these. Don't think they're not. They are. Increasingly, though, some GPs are not attending these sorts of things, but overwhelmingly they are. We know that more than half of our doctors' continuing medical education is funded by the industry. But this is where it gets interesting when the drug company starts to educate the public. So in May this year, a month before the Food and Drug Administration was to assess Boehringer's drug for HSDD, hypoactive-sexual desire disorder, there was a huge amount of television just spontaneously erupted, TV programs. A new website was created, a documentary was aired on a major channel in the US about desire problems, and it was all emphasising the unmet need to treat this problem, which was a disorder now caused by problems in the brain, because that's what an antidepressant can fix. When Viagra was around, female sexual difficulties were to do with blood flow. When testosterone was a panacea, female sexual difficulties were caused by a testosterone deficiency. And now there's an antidepressant, of course it's all about neurochemistry. If we can just play a bit of this TV.
The majority of women experience at some point in their life a loss of sexual desire that comes and goes, but for 1 in 10 women, there's a little more serious situation. It's called hypoactive-sexual desire disorder, or HSDD.
So this is what's happening in America just a few months ago. Boehringer, the drug company, is working with thought leaders in FSD. This is CNN.
We all go through ebbs and flows, but there's a real disorder or dysfunction called hypoactive-sexual desire disorder, or HSDD, that really is...
If you can say it, you don't have it.
Yeah, that's right. Maybe.
HSDD.
Say it 10 times fast.
So we're watching a condition being constructed in front of our eyes. But this is the beautiful thing. Boehringer hires a former Playboy model, who's now a television celebrity called Lisa Rinna, to help educate women in the United States about their problem of sexual desire. And again, you couldn't script this better if you were trying to write the HBO version, which I'm desperately trying to do. But you just could not script it better.
Joining us today are actress and author Lisa Rinna and sex and relationship expert Dr. Laura Berman. Welcome to both of you. Thanks so much for being here. So what do we mean, Laura, when we say this problem is a lot more prevalent than we thought it was?
Well, there's really a range, where it starts with I'm just not in the mood, I have too many kids, too much to do, all the way up to what we now call hypoactive sexual desire disorder, or HSDD is what you can call it if you can say all of that 5 times quickly. But it basically is, it affects about 30% of women in this country.
30%?
30%, and that's just under the age of 59.
So between the CNN studio and the NBC studio, it had gone up from 10% to 30%, so watch out. Now, while the industry is out there educating us all about this condition, there are actually proposals from serious players here to abandon HSDD as a clinical entity, because a lack of desire may sometimes be a normal reaction to a problematic context and therefore should not be pathologized. A little bit of reason enters the debate here. There are actually proposals on the table in the rewriting of the DSM. The DSM-5 is coming out in the next couple of years. There are proposals to abandon this label because it is potentially very out of touch with the reality of women's sex lives. And just quickly, the treatments, this is the other side of this story. The treatments themselves, the safety and efficacy are quite shabby. Viagra was pulled from the race because it couldn't beat a placebo. The testosterone patch was rejected in the US because of potentially serious harms. And flubanserin, that antidepressant that the German drug company put so much energy into trying to prepare the market for, was rejected. And just the other day, the German drug company abandoned that drug. Incidentally, if you're interested, compared to placebo, the drug provided an extra 0.7 satisfying sexual events per month. So if anyone can tell me what 0.7 of an orgasm looks like, I'd be interested to discuss it. The drugs aren't working, but the scientific building blocks of FSD and the claims of unmet need are still around. The marketing is merging with medical science to help manufacture unmet need. There's many examples of this that I've documented before. We're running out of time, but these are just to give you a sense, this is not an isolated problem. 1 in 2 women suffer FSD, 1 in 10 suffer HSDD, 1 in 3 postmenopausal women have the disease of osteoporosis, 1 in 2 men ED, 1 in 3 adults have pre-hypertension. This is a new condition you may not have heard about, but it's certainly coming your way. 1 in 8 people were allegedly having social anxiety disorder in the US, and 1 in 5 of us have irritable bowel syndrome. These are all claims taken from the medical literature. Part of the problem is the panels of thought leaders who define diseases and set the thresholds are often extremely close financially to the companies who benefit from how those diseases are defined. Many examples of this. Just taking one here, hypertension in 2003, that was the panel that described this new condition called pre-hypertension, potentially tens of millions of sick people created overnight. 11 of the 12 people on that panel had financial ties to the drug companies. The same pattern emerges across the medical spectrum. It's a serious problem we're dealing with here. And there's no independent group rigorously evaluating these claims of unmet need, which distort public understanding and public priorities in unhealthy ways. As the boundaries defining disease are inexorably widened and treatment thresholds lowered, the medicalisation of life has become a major threat to human health. Genuine attempts to prevent iatrogenic harm, the harm that's done by medicine itself, will involve a major change in how we define who's sick. This is one of the solutions here. Do we need fresh new panels to define disease, guide prevention and treatment that comprise people completely free of financial ties and more broadly representative? Is it time for society at large to take more of a role in deciding who should be classified as sick? Unless the profession can regain its independence from the commercial influence, my answer is yes. This is Dr. Fiona Godley from the British Medical Journal. Just to let you know, a lot of people are concerned about this. A lot of people are concerned about this closeness between the industry and the medical profession, and increasingly coming to realise that the very definitions of disease are being influenced by this closeness. But there are moves to clean up this mess. In Australia, some of you may know that from about 2007, drug companies were forced to disclose every single educational event for our doctors. And we now know that there's 30,000 of those a year. And if you want a guide to fine dining in Australia, you should look at the company websites, because they will give you a guide to the best restaurants in the country. And that's serious. Josiah Macy Foundation, that's a US foundation, they've called for a ban on industry-funded education of doctors. The Institute of Medicine, a very conservative group in the US, recently called for more disclosure, more independence, and for panels being free of conflicts of interest. The US government, interestingly, passed this year the Sunshine Act, which means that every single payment to every single doctor will soon be on a website in the US. And already it's producing some extraordinary changes. The drug companies have moved to preempt this law and have started to disclose. And there's some extraordinary data out there on the web. Within a few years, we'll be able to search the financial ties of our doctors before we go and see them. Harvard has just banned academics from speaking for drug companies. And there's many, many local examples. In summary, companies are helping to construct the scientific building blocks of sexual disorders. Marketing is merging with medical science, but a major cleanup is coming, maybe. And remember, there is help available for those of you interested in the arts.